This is the story of Amina, a humble maid whose faith and courage shook the throne of Luthara. A tale of truth, betrayal, and redemption, where silence was broken and destiny was reborn. Please subscribe, share, like, and comment.
The dawn mist still clung to the stone walls of Luthara Palace when Amina arrived for her first day. The air smelled faintly of rain and rose oil, the two scents that would define her years in service. Her footsteps were small and careful, the soles of her sandals whispering against the polished floor. She was 17, thin as a reed, wrapped in a plain gray dress that marked her as one of the invisible ones, a palace maid. The palace was a city within a city, a world where whispers traveled faster than the wind. Marble corridors stretched endlessly, echoing with the laughter of nobles and the scolding of guards. Silver chandeliers hung above her head like frozen lightning, and the scent of roasted meat and incense filled every corner. Amina walked quietly, taking in every sound, every glance, every rule unspoken but enforced by years of tradition. She had been brought here by her aunt, a cook who had worked in the royal kitchens for nearly 20 years. "Keep your head low, your hands busy, and your mouth shut," her aunt had told her that morning. "The walls here have ears, and the ears have swords." Amina had nodded, not out of fear, but understanding. She was not a talker. Words had never been her weapon. Her gift was something quieter, the way she noticed things others didn't. A dropped ring, a missing key, the sadness in someone's eyes long before the tears came. That first morning, as she scrubbed the marble steps that led to the Queen's garden, she listened. To the guards discussing border taxes, to the servants gossiping about a mysterious banquet, to the distant shouts of the marketplace far beyond the gates. Even the birds on the palace roof seemed to tell stories if one listened long enough. By noon, her hands were raw, her back aching, yet there was peace in the rhythm of her work. She cleaned, dusted, folded, and fetched, all while her mind painted a quiet map of this golden cage she now belonged to. The palace was beautiful, yes, but beneath the beauty was a strange tension. The nobles smiled too widely, bowed too deeply, and whispered too often. Amina sensed it like a storm brewing behind silk curtains. When she carried linens to the Queen's chambers for the first time, her breath caught. The room was vast and luminous, filled with sunlight that fell like honey through tall arched windows. At the far end sat Queen Leora, the most admired woman in the kingdom. Her beauty was undeniable, golden hair like morning fire, eyes like calm sea glass, but there was a heaviness about her, a shadow in her smile. "Leave them there," the Queen said without looking up. Her voice was soft, but sharp like silk wrapped around steel. Amina obeyed, folding the linens in perfect alignment, her movements precise and humble. But before she could leave, a jeweled brooch slipped from the Queen's vanity and fell to the floor. Without hesitation, Amina picked it up and held it out with both hands. The Queen's eyes flicked up, studying her for the first time. "You have steady hands," she remarked. "Not many servants do." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Amina said quietly, lowering her gaze. The Queen watched her a moment longer. "What is your name?" "Amina, Your Majesty." "Amina," the Queen repeated softly, as though tasting the sound. "A name of peace. I hope you bring some into this place." It was the first kind word anyone had spoken to her in the palace. Amina bowed deeply, then slipped away like a shadow. But her heart carried that sentence with her. "I hope you bring some peace." That night in the servants' quarters, she lay awake listening to the palace breathe. The distant rustle of silk gowns, the echo of boots in the halls, the muffled laughter from the banquet rooms. And beneath it all, faint but constant, the murmur of unrest from the city beyond the walls. Rumors drifted among the maids. The people were hungry, the taxes rising, the king distracted by foreign feasts and luxuries. The Queen, they said, had grown quiet, her counsel ignored. Some even whispered of plots and poison, though none dared say it aloud. Amina listened and said nothing. She rose before dawn each day, her steps becoming part of the rhythm of the palace itself. Her duties took her from the kitchens to the royal library, from the servants' hall to the Queen's dressing room. Each day she observed the way ministers argued in hushed tones, the way soldiers carried messages sealed with crimson wax, the way the Queen's eyes darkened when the king's name was mentioned. One afternoon, as she was dusting the royal maps, She heard voices from the next chamber, low, urgent, and dangerous. She froze, cloth in hand. "The rebellion grows," said a man's voice. "If the king does not act, we will lose the northern provinces." "The king listens to no one," another replied. "But the queen, she still has the people's favor. If we control her, we control them." Amina's heart thudded. She dared not move, not even breathe. The men spoke of power, of betrayal, of a plan that would shake the kingdom. And then, silence. When she finally stepped away, her hands trembled. She had just heard the first spark of treason, and she, a mere maid, was now burdened with its weight. That night, in the servants' quarters, Amina sat by the servants' window and looked out at the distant city lights. She thought of her family in the villages, of the hungry faces she once knew, of the laughter that had grown scarce. The moon glowed over the rooftops like a pale crown. And beneath its quiet gaze, Amina whispered to herself, not in fear, but in quiet resolve. If peace is to come, perhaps it begins with those no one sees. She didn't know then that her whisper would echo through time, that the silent servant of Luthara would one day raise a nation.
The rain fell softly over the palace that morning, tracing silver paths down the tall windows of Queen Leora's chamber. The world outside was a blur of wet cobblestone and gray sky, but inside, every surface gleamed. The mirrors, the marble floor, the crystal perfume bottles lined in careful rows, all perfectly arranged, all whispering of wealth that no longer brought peace. Amina entered quietly, her head bowed, her apron still damp from washing linens. The queen sat before her vanity, her long hair unbraided, flowing like molten gold down her back. A court musician played softly in the next room, a melody so sad it seemed to pull tears from the air itself. The queen glanced at Amina through the mirror. "You move like a shadow, child. I never hear you come or go." "I was told to be quiet, Your Majesty," Amina replied softly. A faint smile touched the queen's lips. "Too many in this palace have forgotten how to be quiet. Perhaps that is why I find your silence comforting." That morning marked a quiet turning point. From that day on, Amina became the queen's personal attendant, her shadow in silk corridors, her silent witness in a world built on secrets. She dressed the queen, prepared her meals, and brushed her hair in the evenings when the moonlight filled the chamber with pale sorrow. And in those moments, when the queen spoke softly to the air, Amina listened, not out of curiosity, but with the deep compassion of someone who understands grief without needing words. The queen spoke often of her son, Prince Kale, who was being groomed to rule, yet showed no interest in power. She spoke of the king, once a lover, now a stranger lost in politics and pride. "Power eats men whole," Queen Leora said one night as Amina braided her hair. "It leaves only the crown behind." Amina paused, fingers trembling slightly. "And women, Your Majesty?" The queen's eyes met hers in the mirror, blue, piercing, tired. "Women are the ashes left after the fire. We survive, but we no longer burn." Amina said nothing more, but that night she could not sleep. Those words burrowed deep into her heart, heavy with truth. In the following weeks, Amina noticed how the queen's moods changed like the tide, bright and gracious by day, withdrawn and distant at night. And with each passing day, the palace seemed to grow colder, as though its golden walls were closing in on themselves. Ministers came and went, their eyes full of calculation. Servants whispered about missing coin from the treasury, about taxes that rose while the people starved. Amina listened quietly while she worked, gathering fragments of truth the way a sparrow gathers straw for its nest. One afternoon, she was arranging fresh roses in the queen's chamber when she overheard raised voices from the adjoining council room. "The rebellion in the West cannot be ignored," a man said sharply. "We need soldiers, not words. The king insists on peace treaties, but peace will not fill empty bellies." A pause, then a third voice, smooth, cold. "If the king is too blind to act, perhaps someone else should rule." The queen's voice rose suddenly, fierce and trembling. "Enough! You speak treason in my presence!" Silence followed, thick and suffocating. Amina froze, hands gripping the vase so tightly that her knuckles went white. The men filed out moments later, their faces pale, their eyes dark with fury. The queen stood alone, staring at the rain beyond the window. Amina hesitated, then approached quietly. "Your Majesty?" The queen turned slowly. For the first time, Amina saw fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for something far greater. "The kingdom is breaking, Amina, and no one will listen, not even the king." I swallowed. "Then perhaps, Your Majesty, someone else must find a way to be heard." The queen looked at her, a long, searching gaze that seemed to pierce through rank and title down to the soul. "You are brave, too brave for a servant." "I am only a maid." The queen smiled faintly. "So was I once, before the crown." That night, Amina was sent to deliver sealed letters to the royal messenger hole. Each envelope bore the queen's mark, but one, smaller and darker than the rest, had no seal. She hesitated before placing it in the courier's bag, sensing danger in its weight. Later, when the palace had gone still, she passed through the hall again and saw the messenger's satchel open. The letter was gone. The next morning, a rumor spread through the servants' quarters. Someone had been found dead near the city gates, a royal courier. His bag was empty. Amina's stomach turned cold. Whatever was in that letter was never meant to reach its destination. Days turned into weeks, and tension in the palace grew like a shadow that refused to lift. The king's advisors whispered behind closed doors. The queen grew paler, thinner, her once radiant laughter reduced to faint sighs. One evening, while preparing the queen's tea, Amina noticed something strange, a faint shimmer of powder at the bottom of the cup before she poured the hot water. Her heart stopped. Poisoned, she froze, the tray trembling in her hands. From the corner of her eye, she saw a court maid slip out of the room silently. Without hesitation, Amina took the cup away, pretending to stumble. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, I spilled it." The queen frowned. "It's all right, child. Bring another." Amina bowed and left the room, but her hands would not stop shaking. She had just saved the queen's life and made an enemy she could not see. That night, she hid the tainted cup beneath the loose floorboard under her cot. The faint bitter scent of poison lingered on her fingers as she whispered into the darkness. "Silence has its strength, but there are moments when silence must act." In that moment, Amina's quiet courage began to shift into something greater, a strength that would soon be tested in fire and blood. Unseen, unheard, she was becoming more than a servant. She was becoming the queen's shadow. And in that shadow, the first light of destiny flickered.
The moon hung low over Luthara Palace, veiled by a thin curtain of mist. Inside the servant quarters, the lamps flickered weakly, their glow stretching like trembling fingers across the walls. Amina sat alone at her small wooden table, a needle in one hand and a piece of pale silk in the other. The day had been long. The queen had fallen ill again, a quiet sickness that came and went like tides, and Amina had spent hours at her bedside, whispering prayers that no one heard. But tonight, she was not sewing for the queen. Tonight, she was recording what she knew. Each stitch, each pattern, each thread of color carried meaning. To the eye, it was simple embroidery, the work of a diligent servant. But to Amina, it was something far deeper. Every curve of blue silk marked a name, every crimson line a danger, every golden petal a secret she could never speak aloud. She had learned this craft from her grandmother, who once told her, "When you cannot speak, let your hands do the talking." And now her hands spoke of treason, of poison, of the whispers that coiled through palace corridors like snakes seeking warmth. She had no one to trust, not the guards, not the other maids, not even her aunt in the kitchen, for anyone could be bought, and loyalty had become a luxury few could afford. So she stitched her truths into fabric, creating a tapestry of warnings hidden beneath beauty. The next morning, Amina brought the finished silk to Queen Leora's chamber. The queen sat by the window, pale and distant, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the city smoke rose faintly against the dawn. "Good morning, Your Majesty," Amina said, bowing low. The queen smiled faintly. "You've been awake all night again." "I could not sleep." "Nor I," the queen sighed softly. "The world beyond these walls feels restless, doesn't it? I hear the chants at night from the city below, the cries for bread, the anger in their voices. The king says it is nothing, but I know what unrest sounds like." Amina's eyes lifted. "Would Your Majesty like to see what I've made?" The queen nodded, and Amina unfolded the silk across her lap. It shimmered in the sunlight like water, a garden of roses and vines, intricate and alive. "It's beautiful," the queen whispered. "You've captured life itself." Amina smiled gently. "Each flower tells a story." The queen traced her fingers over the threadwork. "Then I will keep it close. Beauty and stories, they are both rare in this place." Amina hesitated. "Your Majesty, if ever you doubt those around you, look closely at the roses. You may find answers where you least expect them." The queen looked up puzzled, but Amina only bowed and stepped back into silence. That afternoon, Amina went about her duties as always, yet everywhere she turned she felt eyes watching, the too long glances of courtiers, the knowing smirks of other servants. The palace, once merely cold, now felt dangerous. When she entered the queen's dressing room, she found one of the higher maids, Lady Mira, elegant and sharp-tongued, rifling through the queen's jewelry chest. "What are you doing?" Amina asked, softly. Mira's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "And what business is it yours, girl?" "I only meant—" "You meant to accuse me?" Mira hissed, stepping closer. "Be careful, little mouse. In this palace, even the smallest whisper can crush you." Amina lowered her gaze. "Forgive me, Lady Mira. I spoke out of turn." But as she left the room, her heart beat faster. Mira's presence had always felt wrong, like perfume masking rot. And now she was certain Mira was involved in something darker. That night, Amina returned to her embroidery, adding new threads, black this time, forming a subtle pattern in the fabric's border, a message, a warning hidden for the queen's eyes alone. Hours passed, the palace grew quiet, and then a sound, a soft click of the door. Amina turned sharply. Mira stood in the doorway, holding a lantern. Its flame cast long shadows across her face, turning her beauty into something cruel. "So it's true," Mira said, stepping inside. "You've been making more than dresses with that clever little needle of yours." Amina's heart pounded. "I don't understand." "Oh, I think you do. You've been watching, listening, remembering. The queen may trust you, but others do not. There are those who believe you've seen too much." She set the lantern down on the table, the flame flaring higher. "You should know, Maid, knowledge is a dangerous thing in a place built on lies." Amina met her gaze, steady despite the fear burning inside her. "And lies are even more dangerous when they are exposed." For a moment, Mira's smirk faltered. Then she turned sharply and left, her perfume lingering in the air like poison. Amina exhaled shakily. She looked down at the silk, her secret garden of truth, and realized that every stitch, every hidden word could now cost her life. The next morning, Queen Leora wore the embroidered silk around her shoulders during breakfast with the king. Amina stood nearby, pouring tea, silent as always. The king, tall, proud, and distracted, noticed the cloth and smiled faintly. "You spoil yourself with such things, my queen. You could dress the poor with what you spend on silk." The queen's voice was calm, but her words were measured. "Perhaps beauty can remind us what we owe to those we forget." The king gave a humorless laugh. "Words will not feed the hungry." Amina's heart clenched. She glanced toward the queen, whose fingers tightened around the silk's edge. Their eyes met for a moment, brief but powerful, and Amina knew the queen had seen the coded message woven into the roses. Something had shifted. The queen knew, and she was ready. That night, thunder rolled across the sky. The palace lights dimmed, and the rain fell hard, drumming against the windows like restless hands. Amina stood at her narrow window, staring into the storm, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Her secret was no longer secret. Her silence was no longer safety. If truth must hide in silk, then let the world be clothed in it. She closed her eyes and listened to the storm's song, fierce, relentless, alive. Somewhere in the distance, the rebellion she had heard whispered of was awakening. And deep within the heart of the palace, beneath gold and deceit, a quiet revolution had already begun.
The days in Luthara grew colder. The rain no longer fell softly. It came in hard, sudden bursts, as though the heavens themselves were impatient. The city below the palace trembled with unrest. Whispers of hunger and rebellion echoed through the narrow streets. But within the marble halls, life continued in its golden rhythm, pretending not to hear the storm gathering outside. It was on one of those gray mornings that Prince Kale returned from the northern provinces. The palace buzzed with excitement. The young heir, after months of absence, was coming home. Servants rushed to polish floors, prepare feasts, and light candles in every corridor. To most, it was just another display of royal grandeur. To Amina, it was the return of a face she had seen only once in the queen's locket. He was taller now, his posture proud but not arrogant, his eyes carrying the quiet wisdom of someone who had seen both privilege and pain. The queen's joy was evident as she embraced him at the gates, her tears glimmering like pearls. The king, standing beside her, managed only a nod of approval before retreating back to his council chambers. Amina watched from a distance, her heart moved by the queen's trembling happiness. She had never seen her smile so freely. Later, that evening, while the queen dined privately with her son, Amina tended to her usual tasks, folding the linens, replacing the candles, and bringing in warm towels scented with lavender. When she entered the room, Prince Kale was seated near the window, watching the rain trace rivers down the glass. The queen was asleep in her chair, exhaustion finally claiming her after hours of talk and laughter. Amina bowed silently and began to clear the table, her movements quiet and practiced. But as she reached for a goblet, the prince spoke without turning his head. "You move like you're afraid to disturb the air itself." She paused, startled. "Forgive me, Your Highness." He turned then, a small smile on his lips. "Do you always apologize for being careful?" "I have learned it keeps me alive," Amina said softly. Kale studied her. "You're not like the others here. The servants either fear the palace or resent it. You observe it." Amina said nothing. She wasn't sure if it was safe to answer. The prince stood, walking closer. "My mother speaks of a maid who listens more than she talks. I think I found her." Her heart skipped. The queen had spoken of her? "I only do what I must, Your Highness." Kale's eyes softened. "Tell me something, Amina. What do you see when you look at this palace?" She hesitated, glancing toward the sleeping queen before answering. "A cage built of gold, Your Highness. Beautiful, but still a cage." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then the prince gave a quiet laugh, not mocking, but genuine. "You are braver than most nobles I've met." Amina lowered her eyes. "It's not bravery, my lord. It's the truth. And truth serves no rank." Kale tilted his head, thoughtful. "Then perhaps you should serve more than one crown." She frowned slightly, unsure what he meant. But before she could speak, he added, "I will see you again, Amina." Then he left the room, his cloak sweeping behind him like a passing storm. In the days that followed, the prince's presence transformed the palace. Unlike his father, Kale spoke with guards and servants alike. He visited the kitchens, walked the courtyards, and even helped carry firewood to the queen's chamber. Many found his behavior strange, unbecoming of royalty, but the queen only smiled, her pride quiet and deep. Amina found herself crossing paths with him more often. sometimes in the library, where he read late into the night, sometimes in the garden, where he'd sit alone sketching the ruins beyond the palace walls. One afternoon, she found him watching the laborers repairing a broken fountain. "He say you never leave the palace walls," he said, without looking at her. "I'm not allowed," Amina replied. "Would you, if you could?" She smiled faintly. "I would see the river again, the one near my village. It used to sing to us at dusk." Kale turned to her then. "If I become king, I will make sure every child in this land has time to hear their rivers sing." Amina looked at him, uncertain whether to laugh or cry. "Your Highness, kings do not speak like that." "Then perhaps it's time they did." Something in his tone, steady, full of quiet conviction, stirred hope she hadn't felt in years. But the palace has a way of punishing friendship between worlds. Rumors began to spread. Servants whispered that the maid had captured the prince's attention, that she was using her charm to rise above her station. Nobles sneered when she entered the hallways. Even her aunt warned her, "Child, keep your head down. They break those who fly too close to the sun." Still, Amina continued her work, though now every glance felt like a blade. One evening, she brought the prince a book from the queen's library, an old volume of philosophy bound in worn leather. When she handed it to him, their fingers brushed, and both froze. "You risk much by being kind to me," she whispered, "and you risk more by trusting me. But perhaps that's how change begins, two people refusing to fear what others demand." Before she could respond, a door slammed somewhere down the corridor. Amina flinched. Footsteps approached, hurried, angry. Lady Mira entered, her eyes glinting like shards of ice. "Your Highness," she said sweetly, "the council awaits your presence." Kale nodded curtly. "Tell them I'll come soon." Her gaze shifted to Amina. "And you, Maid, you've overstepped your duties again. The Queen requires you elsewhere." Amina bowed low. "Yes, Lady Mira." When she turned to leave, she caught Mira's smirk, the kind that promised trouble. Later that night, as she returned to her quarters, she found her small chest overturned, her few possessions scattered across the floor, her embroidery torn, her letters burned, and on her pillow, a single silver coin. A warning, or worse, a setup. The next morning, 2 guards appeared at her door. "Amina of the servants' wing," one announced. "You are summoned before the council on suspicion of theft." Her blood ran cold. "Theft," she whispered. "The Queen's emerald comb. It was found among your things." Amina's legs nearly gave way. She had never even touched the Queen's jewelry box. She looked up at the guards, her voice trembling. "I am innocent." But innocence was seldom enough in Luthara. As they led her away, she caught a glimpse of Lady Mira standing at the top of the staircase, smiling. And in that smile, Amina saw the shape of betrayal. That night, the Queen wept behind locked doors, the prince shouted at his father, and thunder rolled once more across the kingdom. Somewhere in the dark, the quiet servant who carried the Queen's secrets and the people's hope was thrown in chains. But destiny had not finished with Amina yet. Her trial would not break her. It would forge her.
The cell was narrow and damp, the walls sweated with cold, and the only light came from a slit high above, where moonlight dripped through like silver tears. Amina sat on the stone floor, her knees drawn to her chest, her wrists bruised from the ropes that bound them. She could still hear the echo of the accusation. "The Queen's emerald comb has been found among the maid's belongings." A lie so sharp it cut through her life in a single stroke. Hours earlier she had been tending to the Queen's chamber. Now she sat in the darkness, branded a thief. The memory of the guards dragging her away haunted her, the gasps of the other servants, the disbelief in the Queen's eyes, the silence in Prince Kale's silence. That was the hardest part. She had thought foolishly that someone would speak for her, that Kale, who had seen her honesty, would stop the madness, but no one had, not yet. The door to her cell creaked open. A torch flickered in the corridor. A guard stepped inside and dropped a bowl of thin broth beside her. She didn't move. "Eat," he said gruffly. "Tomorrow's your trial." Amina's throat tightened. "Trial?" He nodded. "The royal council will hear the charges. If found guilty, you'll be banished, or worse." When he left, the silence returned. She sat in it for a long time, trembling, until a voice, soft and trembling too, came from the darkness beyond the bars. "Amina!" Her head lifted. "Who's there?" From the shadows, a smaller figure emerged. Lyra, one of the kitchen girls. Her cheeks were streaked with tears. "I shouldn't be here," Lyra whispered. "They said you stole, but I know you didn't. Lady Mira was the last one in the Queen's chamber before the guards came." Amina's heart ached. "Then why won't anyone speak?" "Because Mira has power," Lyra said, "and fear is stronger than truth here." The words sank deep. Fear was stronger than truth. Yes, that was the kingdom's curse. "Go, Lyra," Amina whispered, "before they find you." The girl hesitated, then slipped a small folded cloth through the bars. "For luck," she said, before running back into the dark corridor. When Amina opened it, she found a tiny sprig of dried lavender, a reminder of the Queen's chamber, of gentler days. She pressed it to her lips, and for the first time that night, she prayed, not for mercy, but for courage. The next morning, the palace courtyard had never felt so cruel. The nobles gathered in silken robes beneath a white canopy, their jewels glinting under the pale sun. The queen sat on her throne, pale and weary, her eyes red-rimmed. The king beside her was stone-faced, his expression unreadable. Amina stood before them, shackled, her head bowed. Lady Mira stood to one side, her beauty as cold as polished marble. Prince Kael was there too, though his jaw was tight and his fists clenched behind his back. The chancellor stepped forward, his voice echoing, "Amina, maid of the queen's household, you are accused of stealing the royal emerald comb. How do you plead?" Amina lifted her chin, her voice was steady. "Not guilty, my lord." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. "You claim innocence, yet the comb was found in your quarters." "I do not know how it came to be there, but I swear upon my life I would never steal from Her Majesty." The queen looked up then, pain flickering across her face, but she said nothing. Lady Mira stepped forward, a perfect mask of concern. "Your Majesty, I myself discovered the missing comb and sent the guards to search. I only wished to protect the royal house." Lies spoken like silk. The king nodded gravely. "And did you find any reason to believe this maid is innocent?" Mira lowered her eyes. "Only that she is clever, perhaps too clever." A murmur of agreement rose among the nobles. Clever servants were dangerous, clever women even more so. Amina's stomach twisted, but she stood tall. "Your Majesty," she said, turning to the queen, "I have served you faithfully. You know my heart. Please—" "Enough," the king interrupted. "The evidence stands. The council will decide her fate." But before he could continue, Kael stepped forward. "With respect, father," he said, his voice firm, "this is no trial. It is a performance. We judge a girl without seeking the truth." The court gasped. "Prince Kael," the chancellor warned, "you risk dishonoring this assembly." "I risk nothing," Kael said sharply, "but we risk our humanity if we condemn the innocent." The king's gaze hardened. "You would defend a servant accused of theft." Kael met his eyes. "I defend justice." A long silence followed, then the king's voice dropped to ice. "Very well. Since you are so certain of her innocence, you will bear the consequences if she is found guilty." The air went still. Even the wind seemed to stop. The queen rose halfway, whispering, "Please, my king." But it was done. Kael glanced at Amina. Their eyes met, his full of fire, hers full of disbelief. That night, Amina was returned to her cell, but she was not the same woman who had entered it. The trial had not broken her. It had burned something pure inside her into something stronger. She looked at her hands, rough and trembling. "They can chain my body," she whispered, "but they will not chain my truth." Footsteps echoed again. The door creaked open. This time, it wasn't the guard. Kael stepped inside, cloaked and breathless. "I couldn't let it end like this," he said. "I've sent riders to the archives. I'll find proof that you were framed." Amina shook her head. "They'll punish you for even coming here."
"Then let them," he said fiercely, "because I will not stand by while lies destroy what's right." She stared at him, this prince who risked everything for a maid accused of theft. "Why?" she whispered. Kale hesitated. Then he said softly, "Because when I look at you, Amina, I see the courage my kingdom has forgotten." Her eyes filled with tears, but she forced herself to smile. "Then find the truth, my prince, not from me, but for the queen, for the people." He nodded. "I will." And then he was gone. When dawn came again, Amina closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The lavender sprig was still in her hand, faint, fading, but still fragrant. Outside, the sound of hooves thundered across the palace gates. Change was coming, and in the heart of her quiet strength, a flame had begun to rise, one that no prison could ever extinguish.
The night sky above Luthara was restless. Heavy clouds drifted like bruises over the moon, and the wind carried the taste of rain and whispers. Somewhere deep within the palace, torches burned low as the kingdom slept uneasily, unaware that truth itself was awakening. Prince Kale rode through the storm. His cloak snapped behind him, soaked through, his horse's hooves pounding against the stone road as he raced toward the royal archives, a place forbidden after midnight, guarded by laws older than the throne itself. But Kale's heart was a furnace of purpose. Every image of Amina in chains, every trembling breath she took in that cold cell fueled him forward. When he reached the iron gates of the archives, he dismounted, the rain hissing around him. 2 guards stood there, startled to see the prince. "Open it," Kale commanded. "My lord, the archives are sealed by royal decree." "By my decree they are opened," he interrupted, voice sharp as steel. The guards hesitated only a moment before obeying. The doors groaned open, releasing a smell of dust and forgotten secrets. Inside, the great hall stretched endlessly, filled with shelves upon shelves of scrolls, maps, and relics, the memories of a kingdom too proud to remember its sins. Kale lit a lantern and began to search. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, only that the answer lay here, somewhere in the quiet echo of the fallen crown. Hours passed. He combed through ledgers of royal gifts, records of the queen's belongings, lists of servants long dismissed or dead. And then, there it was, a record dated 5 years earlier. An emerald comb, gift of the Eastern Guilds, presented to Lady Mira for her service to the crown during the famine of year 26. Kale froze, his pulse quickened. Lady Mira, the same comb she now accused Amina of stealing from the queen, the same comb she had pretended belonged to the royal treasury. Kale's lantern trembled in his hand. It was not just a lie, it was treason wrapped in vanity. He snatched the scroll and ran. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, Amina sat in silence, tracing invisible patterns on the cold floor. The lavender sprig had lost its color now, its petals brittle and pale, but she still held it like something sacred. She thought of her village, of the songs her mother used to sing while pounding grain, of the stars she once believed would never fade. But dreams fade easily in the dark. Just as her thoughts began to drift, she heard a sound, footsteps, but not heavy march of guards, softer, quicker. The door opened. This time it was Lyra again, eyes wide, breathless. "Amina," she whispered, "Prince Kale is missing. They say he's gone against the king's orders. The palace is in chaos." Amina stood, heart racing. "What do you mean, gone?" "He's searching for proof. I heard the guards talking. If he's caught, they'll exile him." Before Amina could reply, another sound rose behind Lyra, the hard clatter of boots. "Go," Amina hissed. Lyra slipped away just as the guard entered, torch in hand. "You," he barked, unlocking the door, "come with me." Amina's pulse spiked. "Where?"
The queen demands your presence. In the queen's chambers. The queen sat alone, her crown set aside, her face weary and pale in the candlelight. She looked smaller without the weight of ceremony. When Amina entered, 2 guards stood behind her like shadows. The queen motioned for them to wait outside. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the faint sound of rain filled the room. Then the queen said quietly, "I never believed you could steal from me." Amina's throat tightened. "Your Majesty, but belief is not enough. This palace feeds on proof, and proof is a thing easily forged." Her eyes glistened with unspoken sorrow. "You remind me of myself long ago, when I thought truth could win by virtue alone." Amina stepped closer, trembling. "Your Majesty, Lady Mira." "I know. She's cunning, and she's not alone. There are those who would rather see my son shamed than see justice done." Then, as if some inner decision had been reached, the queen opened a small box on her table and withdrew a silver key. "This unlocks the lower passage. It leads out beyond the gardens. Take it." Amina stared, stunned. You're letting me go?" The queen's eyes met hers, fierce, desperate. "I am protecting you, for if they cannot find the maid, they cannot kill the truth." Amina took the key, hands shaking. "I won't run far. I'll come back when it's safe." The queen nodded. "Find Kale. If anyone can prove your innocence, it's him. And tell him," her voice faltered, "tell him I am proud." Back in the storm. Kale rode hard through the eastern gate, clutching the scroll to his chest. Behind him, the sound of hooves thundered, palace guards, sent to drag him back. He urged his horse onward, rain lashing his face. Ahead, through the sheets of lightning, he saw a cloaked figure waiting near the broken archway of the old aqueduct. It was Amina. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other, 2 silhouettes framed by the storm, bound by fate. "How did—" Kale began. "The queen," Amina said breathlessly. "She freed me." He dismounted and pressed the soaked parchment into her hands. "Mira lied. The comb was hers. She gave it to the queen years ago as a gift, then used it to destroy you." Amina read the words, her lips parting in shock. "Then we can show this to the king." Kale shook his head. "Not yet. The king is blind with pride. If we confront him without witnesses, he'll burn the evidence." "So what do we do?" "If we find the council of elders, they still hold the power to summon a truth decree. If we reach them first, Mira's lies will crumble." Thunder rolled across the sky. Amina looked up at him, wet, trembling, but resolute. "Then let's go." And in that moment, beneath the storm, a prince and a servant stood as equals, bound not by rank but by purpose. Back at the palace, Lady Mira stood before the king, her face painted with false distress. "Your Majesty, the prince has betrayed you. He's helping the thief escape." The king's face darkened. "Impossible." "Then why did the guards find his chambers empty and the archives unsealed? He's turned against the crown." The king rose to his feet, fury shaking him. "Send riders. Bring him back, alive or dead." Mira bowed, hiding her smile. "As you command, my king." On the open road. The rain had slowed. Dawn broke faintly across the horizon, turning the clouds to pale gold. Amina and Kale rode side by side through the mist. The road ahead was uncertain, and the shadows of pursuit were closing in. But for the first time in her life, Amina felt the taste of freedom, raw and terrifying and beautiful. She looked at Kale and said softly, "Why are you doing this for me?" He smiled faintly. "Because saving you may be the only way to save the kingdom." And as the sun broke through, illuminating their path, Amina realized something. Her quiet strength was no longer hidden in silence. It had become a force that even kings could not ignore.
The journey eastward took 3 days. 3 days of rain-soaked roads, of sleepless nights beside dying fires, and of whispers of pursuit that grew louder with every sunrise. By the time they reached Eldergate Keep, the mountain wind had turned sharp and thin, slicing through their cloaks like knives. The fortress stood ancient and gray against the clouds, its towers crooked, its walls scarred by time and wars long forgotten. This was where the Council of Elders convened, 13 men and women whose wisdom was older than the throne itself. They were the last safeguard of justice in a kingdom that had begun to lose its soul. Amina looked up at the gates, shivering. "Do you think they'll hear us?" Kale's eyes were steady. "They'll hear me. Whether they'll listen, that's another matter." As the gates opened with a groan, the smell of old stone and incense filled the air. Monks and scribes passed silently through the torchlit corridors, their faces lined with years of duty. An old man with a staff approached. His robes were deep green, embroidered with symbols of the crown. "Prince Kale," he greeted, his voice rasping like dry leaves. "The Council of Elders has not seen a royal in many years. What brings the heir of Luthara to our door?" Kale bowed slightly. "Justice, Elder Terran, and the truth that the court refuses to see." The elder's eyes flicked toward Amina. "And this one?" Kale hesitated. "She is the accused, but also the key to the lie that threatens the kingdom." For a moment Terran studied Amina, his gaze sharp, almost reading her soul. Then he nodded slowly. "Very well. The council will hear you at first light." That night they were given a small chamber to rest. The room was plain. Stone walls, straw bedding, one narrow window through which the moon watched like a silent witness. Amina sat near the window, staring at the flicker of torchlight outside. Kale stood behind her, silent for a long while before saying softly, "I've seen many battles, Amina, but none like this. You fought without sword or armor, yet your courage humbles me." She turned, meeting his gaze. "Courage isn't where I wanted, Your Highness. I only wanted to live in peace." "I know, but sometimes peace is born only after the brave have been wounded." Their eyes lingered, not in romance, but in recognition. Two souls carrying the same weight of injustice. Then Amina said quietly, "If the council believes us, everything changes. For both of us." Kale nodded. "And if they don't, then we make them believe." Outside, thunder murmured across the mountains like a warning. Dawn at Eldergate. The great hall was carved entirely of stone, with a domed ceiling that caught and echoed every word like a drumbeat. 13 thrones stood in a semicircle, each occupied by an elder wrapped in robes of varying hues, crimson for wisdom, silver for judgment, blue for balance. When Kale and Amina entered, the murmurs ceased. Elder Terran struck his staff upon the floor. "Let this hearing begin." Kale stepped forward first, his voice steady and clear. "My lords and ladies, I come before you not as a prince, but as a servant of truth. A woman named Amina stands falsely accused of theft, a crime that hides a greater deceit. The evidence lies here." He placed the scroll upon the marble table, unrolling it so that the emerald insignia of the royal record gleamed in the morning light. Elder Nar leaned forward. "This record claims that the emerald comb was once a gift to Lady Mira. Is this true?" Kale nodded. "It bears the seal of the royal treasurer. If verified, it proves that the item never belonged to the queen's treasury, and that Amina's crime was constructed from a false claim." The council whispered among themselves. Amina stood silent behind Kale, her hands clasped tightly. Elder Terran turned to Amina. "Amina of Luthara, do you speak truthfully that you never touched the queen's property?" Her voice trembled, but her eyes did not. "I swear upon all I have and all I have lost that I am innocent." Her words hung in the air, raw and real. Eldenar nodded. "Truth has a sound," she said quietly, "and I hear it in her voice." But before Kale could speak again, the great doors of the hall burst open. A procession of soldiers flooded in, led by Lord Halric, the king's envoy. His armor gleamed, his expression grim. "The council will cease this farce," declared he. "By order of King Alden of Luthara, you are to surrender the accused and the prince immediately."
Gasps rippled through the chamber. Keo stepped forward. By what right does the king silence the council of elders? Halric sneered. By the right of a father who refuses to see his son corrupted by a servant girl. The words struck like a blade. Amina flinched but lifted her head proudly. If defending truth is corruption, then perhaps this kingdom has long been diseased. The hall fell into stunned silence. Even the elders stared. Halric's face darkened. You dare speak. But Elder Terran struck his staff once more. Enough. This is sacred ground. No royal order holds here without the council's vote. The guards hesitated. Halric growled. Then vote quickly, old man. Terran's eyes flickered to Kale, then to Amina. Very well. Let it be put to judgment. Each elder rose in turn, placing a hand over their heart. One by one, they cast their decision. Truth, said Nara. Truth, said Damar. Truth, said old Saren, voice trembling. And then, doubt, said two others. Doubt, whispered a third. It came down to the final elder, Terran himself. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, his gaze burned like fire. This woman has been forged by injustice, and only those who fear the truth call it treason. He raised his staff high. I vote for the truth. The verdict rang through the chamber like thunder. Amina exhaled, a trembling breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Kale smiled faintly, relief washing over his face. But their victory was short-lived. Halric's soldiers drew their swords. The king will not accept this. Kale stepped in front of Amina. Then he will have to face his son. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Elders shouted, guards clashed, scrolls scattered into the air like frightened birds. Kale and Amina were surrounded, until Terran raised his staff once more, slamming it to the floor. The torches flared, and the great gates of the hall burst open behind them, not by human hands, but by the ancient mechanism known only to the elders. Go, Terran cried. Take the proof and flee. The kingdom needs witnesses, not martyrs. Kale grabbed Amina's hand. We'll return with the truth proclaimed. As they ran through the open gates into the mountain storm, the sound of swords and shouting followed them, fading only as the wind swallowed their trail. At the foot of the mountain, as the sun set in a blaze of crimson, Kale turned to Amina. He said, We're no longer fugitives. We're the voice of something greater. Amina looked back at the fortress, her eyes shining. Then let the world hear it. And in that moment, thunder rolled again, not as warning, but as herald. For the first time, Luthara's silence began to break, and the quiet strength of one servant girl had begun to raise a nation.
The mountains behind them faded into shadow as Kale and Amina descended toward the lowlands. Rain still fell in silver streaks, but the storm that had chased them for days now felt different. Not like danger, like cleansing. For the first time since their flight from the capital, they had a direction and hope. The council's ruling was proof that truth could still prevail, even against the weight of the crown. But the king's envoy had made one thing clear. This was only the beginning. The road eastward led to Varen, a bustling trade town known for its markets and gossip, and for being the heart of the people's pulse. If word of the council's judgment could reach Varen, it would reach the kingdom. They arrived under cover of dusk. The town glowed with life, merchants calling out their wares, the scent of roasted grain and spice filling the air, laughter spilling from taverns. But beneath that cheer, Kale sensed unease, the kind that hums in a crowd that has learned to live in silence. Amina pulled her hood lower, glancing around. If Halric's soldiers have already passed through, they'll be watching the gates. Kale nodded. Then we become invisible. They found shelter in a small apothecary run by a widowed herbalist named Nurain, who recognized neither Kale nor Amina, only the exhaustion in their faces. You look like two travelers who've seen too many storms, she said, pouring them each a cup of nettle tea.
The roads have grown dangerous. Soldiers everywhere, searching for traitors." "Traitors?" Amina asked softly. Muraine nodded, lowering her voice. "They say the king's own son has turned against him, that he's traveling with a servant girl accused of theft and witchcraft." Amina's breath caught. "Witchcraft?" "Yes," Muraine whispered. "They say she bewitched the prince, twisted his mind, and fled with secrets meant for the throne." Cale's jaw tightened. "So the lies have already spread." Muraine looked between them, suspicion flickering briefly in her eyes. "And what brings you to Varin?" Cale smiled faintly. "Only the truth, if anyone still listens to it." Something in his tone made Muraine pause. Then, quietly, she said, "There are those who do. You'll find them in the old cellar beneath the mill after sundown. Ask for Joran, but speak carefully. Ears have grown sharp in these times." That night, beneath the rumble of grinding millstones and the rhythmic drip of water, Cale and Amina found the meeting. It was small, 15, maybe 20 villagers, but their faces were alive with something fierce and restless. Candles flickered over the rough wood table, illuminating the sigil scratched into its surface, a broken crown mended by roots and vines, the symbol of the silent rebellion. A tall man with scarred hands stood at the head of the group. His voice was steady, measured, but filled with conviction. "We do not seek war," he said. "We seek the voice we were promised. The king listens to gold and fear, not to truth. But whispers have reached us, whispers of a prince and a girl who carry the proof of his corruption." The crowd murmured. Amina felt Cale glance at her. They had come for this. Cale stepped forward, pulling the scroll from his satchel. "The whispers are true," he said, "and we bring more than rumors." Gasps filled the cellar as he placed the royal record on the table, its seal gleaming in the candlelight. "This is the treasurer's decree. It proves that the charge against Amina was false, that the theft was staged to protect the queen's deceit." Joran's eyes widened. "And you risked your lives to bring this here?" "We risked more than that. We risked the silence of a kingdom." He looked at Amina. Her heart pounded, but she stepped forward. Her voice, though quiet, filled the room. "I was a servant, nothing more. But when truth dies, even servants must rise. The crown fears not my hands, but my voice, and yours. Together, we can make them listen." For a moment there was only silence. Then applause, faint at first, then growing. Someone whispered, "She speaks like the old queens." Joran smiled grimly. "Then let the old throne tremble." In the weeks that followed, Varin became the first ember of awakening. Messages spread in coded form, carved into bread loaves, written in soot on tavern walls, whispered to travelers along the trade roads. Truth rises from the roots. Amina and Cale traveled by night, guided by those who believed. Farmers, healers, stonemasons, mothers. Wherever they went, hope began to stir like wind before a storm. But news travels fast and lies faster. By the third week, the king had issued a royal decree. By order of the crown, any who aid the traitors, Cale of Luthara, and the witch Amina shall be deemed enemies of the realm. Rewards were offered for their capture. Whole villages were searched, and somewhere within the castle, the queen herself began to question whether she had unleashed something she could no longer control. One night, as Cale and Amina rested beside a dying fire in the ruins of an old watchtower, he said quietly, "When this began, I thought I was saving you." Amina turned toward him. "And now?" He smiled sadly. "Now I see you're saving all of us." She looked into the fire. "No, I'm just reminding people that even silence can burn." Their eyes met, the unspoken truth between them heavier than any crown. Then Cale said, "If the people rise, the king will answer with steel. We'll need allies, armies. Amina nodded. And we'll find them, but not in palaces, in the hearts of those who've been unheard. Far away, in the royal capital, Queen Leora stood alone in her chamber, staring at the shattered remains of her emerald comb, the very object that had begun it all. Her reflection trembled in the mirror as she whispered to herself, "It was only a lie to protect what was mine, so why does it feel like it's slipping away?" Outside her window, a servant's voice echoed from the courtyard, a song carried by the night wind. A song about a girl who stood against kings. A song that would not die. The rebellion had not yet begun in blood, but it had begun in spirit. And in that spirit, Amina's quiet strength had become something no sword could silence. A story that moved through the hearts of a people who were no longer afraid to listen.
The palace had grown cold, not the cold of winter, but the kind that comes when silence replaces song. Queen Leora sat alone in her private chamber, the fire before her nothing more than glowing embers. For weeks she had avoided the throne room, avoided her husband, avoided the world. But she could not avoid the voices. At night they drifted up from the city below, murmurs that carried through the stone corridors. Whispers of rebellion, whispers of a girl named Amina. Her name haunted the queen's dreams, a name that once meant hope, now echoing like a prayer she could not silence. The emerald comb lay broken on her table, the same comb Lady Mira had accused Amina of stealing. Its fractured green pieces glimmered faintly in the dim light, mocking her. She picked one up, running her thumb over the jagged edge. So small a lie, and yet it unmade the peace I built. Earlier that morning, the king had summoned the royal council. He stood before them in his gilded armor, rage and exhaustion lining his face. "My son has disgraced this house," King Alden thundered. "He rides with criminals, spreads treason among the weak-minded, and defies the crown's decree." Lord Halric stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the rebellion spreads faster than we can contain it. Villagers refuse to turn in the traitors. Some have even begun to sing songs in their honor." "Songs?" The king's hand clenched around the hilt of his sword. "Then let them sing from the gallows." The room fell silent. Only the queen spoke. Her voice was calm but brittle. "My lord, perhaps punishment will not silence what punishment created." The king turned sharply. "You dare question me, Leora?" Her gaze met his, unwavering. "I dare question a war against shadows. You seek to destroy a lie, but what if the lie began here?" The chamber froze. "Watch your words," the king hissed. "You speak as if you know something." But Leora said nothing more. She only bowed her head. "As you wish, my king." That night, unable to sleep, she went to the Hall of Records, where centuries of scrolls lay preserved. The royal scribe, an elderly man named Orin, bowed deeply as she entered. "Your Majesty, you should not be here alone at this hour." "I am not alone," Leora said softly, her eyes scanning the rows of sealed documents. "The truth has been waiting here all along." Her hand stopped on a scroll marked with the treasurer's seal, the same that Lady Mira had once presented before the council. She unrolled it carefully. There it was, the signature, the date, the record that proved what she had long suspected. The emerald comb had been gifted to her years ago by the treasury itself. The theft had been fabricated. Her knees weakened. "Oh God," she whispered. "It was true. She was innocent." Orin hesitated. "Majesty?" Her voice broke. "I allowed lies to breathe under my roof, and for what? To protect peace built on pride." Tears slid down her cheeks, falling onto the parchment. The ink blurred slightly,
as if even the truth wept with her. The next morning, the queen summoned Lord Howrick privately. He entered, bowing low. "You called for me, your majesty?" "Yes." Leora's voice was quiet but steady. "Tell me, Howrick, how far have the king's men gone in their hunt for the rebels?" "Every border watched, every road patrolled. Soon Kael and his witch will have nowhere left to run." Her eyes flickered sharp as glass. "Do not call her that again." Howrick blinked. "Majesty?" "You heard me," she said, rising. "The girl's name is Amina, and if your men touch her, it will not be treason that ruins this kingdom. It will be conscience." Howrick frowned, uncertain. "You speak as if she is blameless." Leora turned toward the window. "Because she is." He stared at her, realization dawning. "You mean—" "Yes," she said quietly. "Lady Mira's accusation was false." Howrick's voice trembled. "Then why?" "Because I was silent, and silence can wound deeper than lies." The words hung heavy between them, the confession of a queen whose truth could destroy her throne. Later that day, the queen went to the royal chapel. It was empty, save for a few flickering candles and the scent of burning myrrh. She knelt before the altar, clasping her hands tightly. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I have ruled with silence, and it has birthed a storm I can no longer command." A voice echoed softly behind her. "You could still make it right." She turned sharply. It was Elder Taran, his robes damp from travel, his eyes filled with the weariness of someone who had seen too much. "How did you—" "The council knows what happened," Taran said. "Kael and the girl escaped with our blessing, but the king will not rest until their blood is spilled. You are the only one who can stop him." Leora bowed her head. "And how do I stop a man who has become death to mercy?" "By speaking louder than his fear. The people already believe in the girl, but they will rise only when the queen herself stands beside the truth." Leora looked away, tears catching in her lashes. "If I do this, Alden will see it as betrayal." Taran nodded. "Sometimes betrayal to falsehood is loyalty to justice." She closed her eyes, trembling. "Then may justice forgive me." That night, a sealed letter left the palace under the hand of a messenger cloaked in gray. It carried the royal crest, but not the king's signature. Its destination was Varan. Inside, there were only a few words, written in Leora's delicate script. "To the one I wronged, the truth is yours to speak now. The lie was never yours to bear. L." Days later, that letter reached Amina's hands. She read it beneath the canopy of whispering pines, Kael standing beside her. When she finished, her eyes shimmered, not with triumph, but with something quieter. Compassion. "She's confessing," Kael said softly. "The queen herself." Amina folded the letter carefully. "Then it's time to forgive." Kael looked at her, surprised. "Forgive?" "Yes," Amina said, "because rebellion without mercy becomes just another crown." The wind stirred the trees above them as if carrying her words farther than she knew, toward a kingdom ready to listen. And in that moment, the seed of something new took root, not rebellion, but rebirth. A truth once buried in silence now had a voice that began as a whisper and would soon become a roar.
The road to the capital was no longer empty. Where once soldiers had marched in silence, now moved the people, farmers with pitchforks, merchants with banners, children with torches of hope. The whispers that began in Varan had become chants. The song that carried Amina's name now echoed across valleys and rivers. Truth
rises from the roots. Kale rode at the front, beside Amina. His royal crest was covered, his sword dulled by travel, but in the eyes of those who followed him, he was already their king. Amina rode quietly, her cloak drawn around her shoulders, her gaze fixed ahead on the shimmering spires of Luthara city. "It feels strange," she said softly, "to return to the place where it all began." Kale glanced at her. "And where it must end." By the time they reached the outskirts, the capital was on edge. The king's banners still flew, but beneath them stood uneasy soldiers, men torn between duty and doubt. Rumors had reached the city long before Amina and Kale did. The queen's confession had already begun to circulate among the servants and guards. And though no one dared speak it aloud within palace walls, truth has a way of walking through locked doors. As they approached the main gate, a group of guards stepped forward, weapons raised. "Halt! By order of King Alden, all travelers are—" The captain's voice broke off as he recognized Kale. His sword wavered. "Your Highness." Kale dismounted, removing his hood. "If you still serve this kingdom, then you serve its truth. Stand aside." The captain hesitated, eyes darting between Kale and Amina. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. "Open the gates," he commanded. And so the gates of Luthara, once sealed against its own people, swang open. The crowd followed them into the city square. Bells tolled in alarm as soldiers scrambled to take position, but the people did not scatter. They stood firm, their torches lighting the dusk. Kale raised his voice. "People of Luthara, you were told we were traitors, that we fled in shame, but we bring only the truth your king has buried." He unfurled the scroll before the crowd, the royal seal glinting in the firelight. "This," he said, "is the proof of the lie that condemned an innocent woman, a lie born in this palace to protect pride, not justice." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Amina stepped forward. Her voice, though soft, carried over the noise, calm and clear as dawn after a storm. "I was a maid, a servant in your queen's house. I had no voice, no name beyond what others gave me. But when truth was silenced, I found my strength not in anger, but in faith. If I can stand here, so can you. For truth belongs not to kings or crowns, but to hearts that refuse to bow." The crowd erupted in cheers. From the palace balcony above, King Alden appeared, his golden armor gleaming, his expression thunderous. "Enough!" his voice roared across the square. "You dare turn my people against me?" Kale looked up at his father. "You turned them against yourself when you chose power over justice. Justice? Justice is obedience. Without it, there is only chaos." "Then let there be chaos," Kale said quietly, "if it leads us to truth." The king motioned to his guards. "Seize them!" But none moved. The soldiers stood frozen, torn between command and conscience. Among them were men who had once served with Kale in the border wars, who had seen his courage firsthand. One by one, they lowered their weapons. The king's fury deepened. "You defy me?" Then a voice, soft but resolute, spoke behind him. "No, Alden, they defy your fear." Queen Leora stepped into the light of the balcony, her emerald gown flowing, her face pale but unwavering. In her hands she held the broken comb. "This," she said, raising it for all to see, "is the symbol of my silence. I let a lie take root in this house, a lie that condemned the innocent and crowned deceit. I speak now because I can no longer serve both truth and pride."
The square fell silent. The king turned to her in disbelief. "You?" "Yes," she said, cutting him off. "It was Lady Mira who spun the lie, but it was my silence that gave it life. And if my crown stands upon deceit, then let it fall." With trembling hands she removed her jeweled circlet and placed it upon the balcony rail, where it glimmered in the dying light, a symbol of guilt laid bare. The king stared at her, his voice breaking. "You would destroy everything we built?" "No, Alden," she said. "I would save what's left of it." Below, the people chanted Amina's name, louder and louder, until it rolled like thunder. "Amina! Amina!" The king's face twisted in rage. "You fools!" he shouted. "She is a servant, a nobody!" But the crowd's reply came in one voice. "She is the truth." The king drew his sword. "Then let truth bleed." He lunged toward the edge of the balcony, but Cale was faster. Their blades met with a clash that echoed through the square. "Father, don't!" Cale shouted. "This ends now." "Not while I breathe," Alden roared, striking again. They fought fiercely, not as king and prince, but as two men divided by pride and purpose. Sparks flew as steel met steel. Amina watched from below, fear and sorrow battling in her chest. She wanted to intervene, to stop the madness, but this was a battle that had been years in the making. Then, as Alden raised his sword for the final strike, Cale deflected and disarmed him, sending the blade clattering across the marble floor. The king stumbled, breathless, cornered by the son he no longer recognized. "Do it," Alden spat. "Finish what you started." "No," Cale said. "I will not become you." He turned to the crowd. "The crown has ruled too long through fear. Today, Luthara chooses the truth." He looked at Amina, "And she will be its voice." The people cheered. That night, the palace gates were open to all. Queen Leora stepped down from her throne, her confession recorded in the royal archive. Cale refused the crown, instead forming the Council of the Roots, a circle of elders and commoners alike to guide the kingdom toward renewal. And Amina, once a maid, once accused, became the keeper of conscience. When asked what gave her the strength to stand against kings, she simply replied, "Because silence is not peace. It is the slow death of truth." In the years that followed, songs were written of her, not as legend, but as reminder. And so, the kingdom of Luthara was reborn from the ashes of its lies, not by swords, not by crowns, but by the quiet strength of a woman who refused to bow.
Seasons turned like the slow breath of the earth, and with them, the kingdom of Luthara changed. The echoes of war had faded into the soil, swallowed by time, yet the people's hearts still carried the memory of a woman whose quiet courage had once steadied a falling throne. Her name was Amina, the maid who rose from servitude to strength, the servant who became the soul of a nation. But now Amina's voice was silent. Her body rested beneath a grove of olive trees overlooking the city she had helped save. Yet her spirit, her strength, her faith, her unyielding grace had not vanished. It had taken root in another heart. That heart belonged to Janet. Years before, when Janet was just a frightened girl with nowhere to go, she had been found by Amina in the narrow, dust-worn alleys of Luthara's old quarter. The city had been broken then. Nobles feasting while the poor starved, hope fading like the last glow of dusk. Amina had taken her in, fed her, and given her work sweeping floors and fetching water. But what Amina truly gave her was far greater than shelter. She gave her purpose. By the dim light of a flickering lantern, Amina had taught Janet how to read the old scriptures, how to write her name, and how to pray when strength seemed gone. She often said, "Power does not always wear a crown, child. Sometimes it kneels and serves, unseen but eternal." Janet had never forgotten those words.
Now, standing at the edge of that same olive grove years later, the air cool and gold with dawn, Janet looked out over Luthara. The once glorious kingdom shimmered below her, but the brilliance felt hollow. The palace towers were taller than ever, yet the streets were filled again with hunger and fear. The nobles had returned to their vanity, and the people, weary of betrayal, had turned bitter and silent. The maid who had saved them, their Amina, was now spoken of only in faint, uncertain tones. Some said she was a myth, others claimed she had been a saint, but to most, she was just a forgotten name on the lips of the old. Janet's heart ached at that. She still remembered Amina's voice, calm, steady, unbroken even in hardship. She remembered her saying, "When the world forgets, that is when you must remember most." So Janet did remember, and remembering lit a fire inside her that could no longer be contained. The stirring. Janet began small, just as Amina once had. She gathered a few children in the square and taught them letters scratched on pieces of bark. She sang old songs Amina had taught her, songs of unity, of labor, of faith stronger than fear. People began to watch, then they began to listen. At first they mocked her. "Another dreamer," they said, "a maid's shadow." But Janet didn't fight back with anger. She smiled the way Amina used to, patient, knowing, and kept teaching. Soon the merchants came to her asking if she could help their sons learn numbers. Then the widows came seeking comfort for their grief. Her gatherings grew until the small square overflowed. Every word she spoke carried the warmth of Amina's teachings, humble, kind, and piercing as truth itself. Then one evening, as the sun set behind the palace, a man in royal robes came to see her. He was Prince Elian, son of the king who had once been saved by Amina's courage. He studied Janet for a long time before speaking. "You remind me of her," he said quietly, "the maid my father used to speak of, the one who refused to bow to fear." Janet bowed her head. "I am only her student, my lord." "Then the kingdom owes you gratitude still, for her spirit seems to live on in you." The trial. But not all were pleased by her rising influence. The ministers of Luthara, fearing that her words might awaken the people again, began to whisper against her. They said she was sowing rebellion. One night guards came to drag her before the council. "Who are you," they demanded, "to speak as though chosen by fate?" Janet lifted her eyes calmly. "No one," she said, "only a servant who remembers what this kingdom once stood for." The council scoffed, but her words spread through the city like a spark through dry fields. By dawn the people gathered outside the palace, not with weapons, but with torches raised high, chanting Amina's name. They demanded truth, unity, justice, the same ideals Amina had once lived and died for. Inside the council chamber, Prince Elian rose from his throne and spoke. "If a servant can move the hearts of 1,000 souls while we sit in comfort, then perhaps we are the ones unworthy to lead." The hall fell silent. Janet was released. The legacy renewed. In the years that followed, Luthara slowly began to heal again, not through decrees or force, but through compassion. Janet became a teacher, a voice of wisdom, a mirror of the maid who had come before her. She never sought power, only peace. And the people at last began to remember that greatness does not always roar, sometimes it whispers. Every evening, Janet returned to the olive grove where Amina rested. She knelt there, her hands folded in the same quiet humility that once defined her mentor. "You said to be the warmth when the world grows cold. I tried, Amina, I tried." And the wind through the olive trees seemed to answer her, soft, eternal, carrying the promise that the flame would never die.
Years passed, and the once forgotten name of Amina began to rise again on the tongues of the people, not as a servant, not as a myth, but as the mother of Luthara's rebirth. Songs were sung in her honor, children learned her story by heart, and wherever the name of Amina was spoken, the name of Janet was never far behind. Janet never sought such recognition. To her, the work was not about fame or power, it was about remembering the truth that had saved Luthara once before. "No kingdom stands on gold as swords," she often said. "It stands on the goodness of those who serve." Under her quiet leadership, schools began to bloom in places long abandoned, farmers' guilds reformed, widows and orphans found shelter once more, The same people who had been voiceless found themselves heard again, not because Janet shouted, but because she listened. But peace, even reborn, is never without testing. One bitter winter, Luthara's harvest failed. The skies withheld rain for months, and famine shadowed the land. Desperation stirred old fears. The nobles retreated to their storehouses, protecting their wealth, while the poor filled the temples with prayers that went unanswered. Whispers spread that the kingdom had been cursed for exalting the memory of a maid instead of appeasing the gods. Janet, weary but steadfast, traveled from village to village, urging unity. Amina's strength was not in miracles, she said to the crowds. It was in compassion. The gods do not feed the hungry, we do. But there were those who hated her words, men of influence who found her humility too powerful to control. They began to accuse her of sorcery, claiming that her devotion to Amina had angered the heavens. Soon, she was summoned before the royal court once again. The hall was cold and filled with murmurs as Janet entered, her steps slow but sure. Prince Elian, now king, sat upon the throne. His face bore the weight of grief. His advisors had turned him against her with fear of rebellion. "Janet," he said solemnly, "they say your teachings defy the will of the gods. They say you have led the people astray. What do you say for yourself?" Janet lifted her gaze. Her voice was calm, the same calm that Amina had carried into every storm. "My lord, I have led no one astray. I have only reminded them that mercy is holier than fear. If kindness offends the gods, then perhaps we have misunderstood divinity itself." The court fell silent. Her words rippled through the chamber like wind through tall grass, quiet yet impossible to ignore. An old woman in the crowd began to weep. Then a young farmer stepped forward, calling out, "She fed my children when no one else would." Another voice followed, then another, until the hall was filled with cries of gratitude and faith. King Elian rose slowly, his eyes glistening. He descended from the throne and knelt before Janet. "Forgive me," he said softly. "You are not the curse of Luthara. You are its conscience." That day became known as the Day of Kneeling Light, when a king bowed before a servant's spirit and a kingdom rediscovered its heart. Under Janet's guidance, granaries were opened, nobles shared their stores, and every village rebuilt what hunger had taken. When the rains finally came, the people of Luthara gathered beneath the olive trees, the resting place of Amina, and held torches that burned through the night. They sang in unison, their voices rising through the cool air. "She served and we were raised. She knelt and we stood tall. She gave her life and we found ours." Janet stood among them, her face bathed in golden light. The fire reflected in her eyes, and for a moment it seemed as though Amina herself stood beside her, ageless, smiling, radiant with peace. Years later, when Janet's hair had turned silver, she often sat beneath those same olive trees with children gathered at her feet. They would ask her to tell the story of Amina again, and she always would. "She was just a maid," she would begin softly, "but her courage carried a kingdom through its darkest hour." One child once asked, "And what became of her flame?" Janet smiled, pressing her hand to her heart. "It burns still, here and in you. As long as someone remembers, the flame never dies." When Janet's time finally came, the people of Luthara buried her beside Amina, beneath the same tree whose roots had drunk the tears of both women. Two simple stones stood side by side, one for the maid who raised the nation and one for the student who kept it standing. And every spring, when the olive trees blossomed white against the blue Lutharan sky, the petals fell like snow, soft, pure, and eternal. A whisper from the past reminding all, true power is not in ruling others, but in lifting them. And thus the kingdom endured.
Thank you for watching this story, where truth rises and hearts find courage. If Amina's journey moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more stories of strength, faith, and redemption. Until next time, keep believing in quiet strength.